that studying is only of a certain amount of value, meaning you can study for your entire life what a strawberry tastes like. And until you taste the strawberry, you never know. You can study for your entire life what theoretically what red looks like from like a kind of atomic perspective. Until you see the color, red has no meaning to you. And so experience is the king.
Test the claim.
We had a discussion a while back in which I described my understanding about the state of belief. And I guess the crux of what I was saying was that I didn't feel like the language that some people of a religious persuasion use is that there is some degree of will in the establishment of belief. And my position was that although our actions can influence our beliefs, the state of belief is an emergent phenomenon. It's something that occurs to us much akin to our desires, for example, or a thought that will pop into one's head. It's not something that we make a conscious decision will take place. It's something that will, almost with a will of its own, occur to you
spontaneously,
and it's something over which we don't have a huge amount of influence, at least once it's established.
Yes.
And you say, and I think at the time we had a mild disagreement about how belief comes about, but you indicated that you may have had a change of heart.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so obviously when we spoke before, I can't remember what my actual response was at the time, but I remember not being in complete agreement with you. I was like not fully sold on this concept. But after having a lot of time pondering the differences between people, religious people, Christians, Muslims, their interpretation, speaking to different Muslims about their particular view, them being completely convinced that that particular form or interpretation of Islam is correct. Or speaking, for example, to Shias and them being completely consumed and believing that, wow, like this is the correct person or this is the correct line of succession. It's Imran Ali or is it the seven, whatever, the Sahabas or whatever it is. As well as talking to Muslims, I started to really think about this over the past few weeks. It's actually been a couple of months actually since we had the chat. And I've realized that we do have the power to influence our beliefs. Influence, meaning, let's say, for example, I'm an atheist and I'm saying, okay, I'm open to the idea of God existing, or a God of some kind. So I'm going to read arguments for the existence of God to see if there's any reasonable arguments as to why that creator exists. We can support that process of coming to a belief through the use of reason, debate, logic, argumentation. All of these instruments are useful in the journey towards a belief. However, the actual point of, we could say, crystallization or manifestation of that belief, from my perspective, is a phenomenon, especially in regards to the unseen, in relation to the unseen, things that we don't have absolute proof for. It is something that is what I would describe as spontaneous, or using your language, emergent, meaning it happens. The point at which a person moves from atheist to theist, when, for example, they could have been an atheist for 45 years, and then they come to a new realization, and all of a sudden, they had heard all the arguments for the existence of God, and they had laughed at all those arguments and said that's nonsensical. But then all of a sudden they have a situation that arises, and all of a sudden they realize, wow, there is a God. That kind of eureka moment is not something that you can induce. It's just by will alone.
Yeah.
It's for me, it's a phenomenon that happens to people. And specifically in relation to my faith, Christianity, a person coming to reaching the point where they believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for their sins, was raised from the dead, and they believe in what the Bible says. The journey from not believing in those set of propositions and ideas to kind of somehow reaching a point where you have a solid faith in that is something that I could actually say is unexplainable. You can, yes, they read the book. Yes, they read the text. Yes, they interacted with the theology. Maybe they heard a preacher, but the actual point of internalizing that and now it's becoming an actual faith position is a very mysterious thing.
Sometimes the failure to attain faith is described often by theists as a deficiency in one's approach to the absorption of evidence.
And even sometimes your sincerity is questioned as well.
Yeah.
If you were sincere about this,
Yeah, I
you
include
would
that.
believe.
I include that in the umbrella of
Yeah.
deficiency.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I feel that the real deficiency is in those who deny belief that has in fact occurred upon them. That's where I would infer a level of insincerity.
I agree.
Because often people can believe something but even deny it to themselves, let alone to the people around them.
Very true.
But actually there is a huge, I think there is a kind of an unknown mass of people who enter into, let's say, religious investigation with what can only be described as an open heart, with a
100%.
sincere approach,
100%.
and who are actually looking to become answerable to a higher power,
Yes.
but are unable to attain a state of belief
In the particular tradition or religion.
in a clear iteration of that higher authority.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I find that can be a source of great sadness for some people. I know even in my own personal journey, I've even gone through the mechanics of praying to what I believe were a number of different deities. I'm open enough to say that. But I never experienced despite what I believe were sincere overtures, I never experienced the state of belief. It never took root for me.
How do you explain that? Because if you don't mind me just kind of responding to some of that, there are people who are completely resistant, absolutely resistant to religious ideas, the existence of God, whether the Bible is true. And not only they reject any even discussion about the concept because they're so resistant. That is not what we're speaking about. We're not speaking about people who are absolutely diametrically and politically opposed to God and what God represents, what the Bible.
But I don't think even those people can obstruct the state of belief.
Yeah, I agree.
In fact, okay, maybe if you were to have lived a very cocooned life where you never come in contact with those ideas, fine. It's very rare for those things to the ideas to spontaneously emerge, although the awareness of a higher authority, I don't think, as far as I'm aware, doesn't require any exterior interference.
No, not at all. People can come to that just naturally.
Yeah, but in terms of a specific adherence to a given creed or religious doctrine,
that needs to be presented to you.
It needs to be presented to you. You need to be exposed to certain specific information.
Yeah.
But once you're exposed to it, no matter how against those ideas you are, it appears to me that one is defenseless against the state of belief taking root. Despite what one might project externally, outwardly, there is no defense from an emergent state of belief.
Yeah, so you cannot. Right. Well, it's like once the ideas are presented, as you just said, they can take root or they may not take root.
Right.
But people who are hyper resistant to these concepts, and maybe they're afraid that maybe they will believe in these things, they can set structures in place to completely stop any potential idea coming upon them. But what I wanted to contrast that is what you said, where people are sincerely, genuinely open to these religious traditions, whether that be Christianity or Islam or another religion.
Let me just, I'm sorry to interrupt you, just before you depart from what you just described, and I think I mentioned it earlier, it's those people who build up those strong defenses out of fear that they may succumb to belief, who are actually demonstrating that they already have one foot in the door of belief, because they are already acknowledging the power
of the ideas.
of the idea.
Absolutely.
You're already on your way.
On a subconscious level, the fact that you have to resist the idea so strongly shows you its potency.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that.
I would agree with that. And what I want to do is contrast that kind of mentality of hyper resistance with people who are sincerely open and seeking and reading the Bible, reading the Quran, praying, trying to stimulate belief and faith.
Yeah.
But they still haven't reached that point. And when I think about myself, when I was younger, my kind of point of coming to faith was when I was 14 years old. And I remember I was walking home at like really late at night, and there was this gentleman who was just like standing on the side of the road. It was just this guy, and he just said to me, "Mate, like, you need to know God." And he goes, like, "When you go home, like, pray to God, like, try to read the Bible."
So this is the beginning of your journey.
This is my beginning of my actual personal journey. I was raised in a Christian household, but I never personally believed it.
Right.
Like, yeah, I could explain some of the faith to you because I learned some of it, but I didn't believe it.
Right.
But after this kind of experience where this man, I've never seen this man to this day in my life. After this instance, I went home. I did what he asked me to do. I started reading the Bible just on my own. I was given a Bible like 4 or 5 years beforehand. It's just in my house, like I never read it. I started just reading the Bible for myself, just like week after week. And then after a period of like a few months, I remember just reaching a point where I said to myself, I believe this is true. And the irony is that I didn't receive apologetics training. I didn't receive 1,000,001 arguments for the existence of God. I didn't know about biblical manuscripts and evidence and any of these. I didn't know about any of these things. I was 14, I was a kid. But the crystallization or the realization or the emergence of that belief was something that did not just happen because I had simply read information. It wasn't just simply reading about stories, because I could have read about Homer's Iliad, or I could have read about an ancient like fairy tale or mythological story, and it would have did nothing to me.
Right.
But for some unknown, mysterious reason, faith was produced in me in that moment. That's how I describe it in a religious sense. But the belief emerged spontaneously, and it's never left me to this day. All the argumentation is just like used to strengthen the pre-existing phenomenon that happened.
I'm interested to know, like, what were the, like, you've given a brief explanation about the circumstances surrounding the moment belief occurred to you.
Yeah, so it's like the moment of investigation began at that moment.
Right.
Like personal investigation where I started to actually go to the sources and read them.
But it was a moment of exposure to some information that prompted that state of belief.
Yes.
But like you say, there may have been many instances, countless instances of a similar exposure to information that perhaps may have been of a similar nature.
Of course.
Prior to that belief taking root, but it was that particular message that took root for you.
Yeah.
I find it interesting, there are sometimes you encounter people who have moved, like changed denomination or apostated from one faith to another, and in some cases have done so a number of times.
Yeah.
However, in each instance, they appear to have had a sincere belief in that particular creed.
Yeah.
I find that interesting, and it leads me to tend to believe that there are people who tend to believe.
Yes. Yes.
And I guess you would contrast that to your kind of hyper skeptic,
of course,
who find it difficult to really believe, to believe anything at all.
And they set up internal barriers mentally, psychological barriers to try and resist at all costs the concept.
But that also leads me to the idea that perhaps there are some people who are more predisposed, and I'm led to believe that there is even an anatomical, physiological component to the ability to believe.
I agree.
or the extent to which one can believe. So I can't cite a paper or anything, but having had one or two discussions with a neurologist friend of mine, it was suggested that, for example, those who have a greater tendency to believe also demonstrate on a brain scan more activity in the temporal lobe
Okay.
of the brain. I don't know whether it is related to the size of the temporal lobe, but there is more activity in those who tend to believe. And I think how they established this was that they took a selection of people, some who were believers and some who weren't, and when asked to imagine God or to imagine this higher authority, those who believed showed an increase or a higher level of activity in the temporal lobe versus those who were not at that point in their lives in a state of belief.
Yeah.
And it appears that through some sort of study of this nature, they were able to demonstrate that some people intrinsically have a greater disposition to the state of belief than others.
I think that's possible. Again, it's not. I'm not sure about the science, like,
Right.
but
I'm
I
not
think
sure
that's
about it either,
but
that's my recollection.
I'm open to believing that concept. That is interesting. That could be possible, because how are we able to explain two individuals who are exposed to the same information
Yeah.
verbatim, yet one person is completely convinced of its veracity, yet the other person is unable to even entertain the idea as being true? And it's like, what contributes to that?
That leads me even to like more spiritual questions. Like, for example, if we conceive of the idea of divine justice, and part of one's salvation, let's say, is dependent upon our belief in one principle or another.
Yeah, exactly.
Yet, if we are born with varying levels of ability to believe, are we then commencing on that journey that I guess what would ultimately be a test of faith on a level playing field? If one person has the capacity a greater capacity to believe in something than me, and at the end of our lives, our eternal fate is weighed up by whether we believed in a principle or not. Could one consider that a fair state
It's
of?
a very good question,
Yeah.
because, and then we have to factor in, like, a person who's born into a particular religious family that makes exclusive claims has a great advantage over someone who isn't. Who's born in a completely, like, so.
I think the statistics bear out that if one is born into a given,
Yeah, you typically stay.
right.
So it's like that. On the surface, you could say it probably doesn't look fair at all.
No.
And those are very important questions that, sadly, I don't have the answers to. But I think it's something that's important to ponder and say, what I mean is I don't have the answer to the sense of fairness or rightness of some humans having a stronger capacity to just believe in that said religion compared to others. And what I just think is really fascinating is, like I said earlier, I could live my life today by choice, as if Jesus isn't God, as if I don't believe that the God of the Bible is true, that I don't believe Jesus died. I could literally live my life from a kind of practical perspective, from a position of non-belief, but it wouldn't change my internal state even an inch. That sense of,
It would be a performance.
yeah, it would simply be activity.
Yeah.
Like it would literally simply be activity. I'm just living, using my free will in this way, but in my heart and soul, the belief that exists is present. And it's an interesting concept, because just as you cannot just choose, no, you could live your life as a Christian. Of course you could. You could just open the Bible, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, you know what I mean? Like, and you can line up your life physically. You can even be praying every day, but it wouldn't be real because you don't believe it.
But then how? Okay.
And you can't induce it by force.
Yeah. So how then?
So
So when
it's a
I go back
strange
to this
concept.
question of divine justice,
It's a strange
how
concept.
then can the fate of my eternal soul, if one was to believe in that, be subject to whether or not I believed when I am incapable of inducing a state of belief? So it's often described, maybe by one religious group or another, as an issue of freedom of choice, of will, of an issue of free will, whether you believe or not. I see the reality as something completely different.
I would say the will element is in the searching, is in the investigation.
Yes.
But in the emergence, you can't control that. I don't believe you can.
I would like to think that if there were some sort of divine justice, it would be exactly what you just highlighted. It would be the sincerity
Sorry.
and the openness with which you have embarked upon that journey of discovery, rather than whether ultimately it resulted in a state of belief.
Yeah, but that possibly could be factored into. I don't know. That could be. I don't know.
I will resist the temptation to relate this to Zoroastrian
Do
principle,
it, man. Do it through. Throw it in there.
but I think it's that process of sincere reflection and searching. It's the intention behind one's investigation into these so far unanswered questions,
Yeah.
which is what kind of loads your oh, sorry, I think I might have just damaged my chair.
Careful.
I think it's the intention with which you embark on that journey of discovery, which is what will inform if there is a punishment and reward at the end of one's life. Let's say it will be the intention with which you approach that journey, rather than whether you were able to, like we said, induce a state of belief per se.
Let me give you an example of what I mean as well. So let me give you like a kind of like real world example, irrespective of whether people believe this is true or not. It doesn't matter, because it ultimately causes a person to go from one state to another. There are many people in the Muslim world who have heard about Christianity their entire lives. And they know what it is. They understand the theology to a certain extent. They know the story. They don't believe. But then that Muslim individual ends up having a dream where they believe, they claim they believe that they met Jesus Christ in a dream. Maybe they've had multiple dreams. And that dream has led them to change their entire religion, just simply based on that experience. So new information entered their world, and it caused them to do what no argumentation or debate ever would have done, which is that belief emerged spontaneously after that situation. Whether someone believes that actually happened or it was a good thing or a bad thing, that individual who you could have sat down and explained Christian theology for hours and hours and hours, and they would have continuously said to you, no, the Bible's corrupt, Muhammad is a prophet of God, whatever it is. They had a dream where they met a man who they believed was Jesus, and he told them, I'm the truth. And they ended up becoming a Christian. You cannot explain that. You cannot explain what triggers that shift in state, because they're going from one absolute conviction to another.
There was an interesting conversation on the channel last week between Bloodfire and Chris, where they were comparing the value of the study of scripture versus personal experience.
Oh, fantastic.
And what I'm beginning to understand is that the taking root, the emergence of a state of belief, is itself a personal experience of that kind, spiritual. I mean, I guess when it relates to matters of religion, let's say, it is a spiritual experience, and it's something over which you don't have power.
That's why I call it a phenomenon.
Right.
So, the Apostle Paul was a Jew, according to the story. He was on the road to Damascus, Syria. He believes he saw Jesus. All of a sudden, he changed his religion, right? Based on that experience. So, irrespective of whether you believe that these experiences are real. That person, new information has come to that person, which has shifted their perspective. And I am in the camp that studying is only of a certain amount of value, meaning you can study for your entire life what a strawberry tastes like. And until you taste the strawberry, you never know. You can study for your entire life what theoretically what red looks like from like a kind of atomic perspective. Until you see the color, red has no meaning to you. And so experience is the king because it drives your state of mind. It's like I used it. I made also a reference earlier to the shape of the earth. Okay, there's people who believe the earth is flat today. There's no amount of argumentation, no amount of evidence, no amount of when I say evidence, meaning NASA evidence. It's not absolute evidence.
Right.
No amount of
Like mainstream evidence.
or points or reasoning is going to get them to change their mind. Whereas if you took that person and you put them on the moon just for 10 minutes and just said, look, just look, they would come to the conclusion that what they believe is false. Because that new information that has entered their world, that new experience has contributed to a new emergent state of belief. And now they come and say, no, my friend, it's not flat. There isn't an ice ring around the earth. The earth is a different shape. Maybe it's a different shape. I'm using a random example. So
but the reality will be what it is. That
so the information, that new experience is what shifts your perspective. And that's like.
But don't get me wrong, the idea of argumentation, of rationalization,
is useful.
also has a weight.
Does have value.
And I think it just depends on how you're wired.
Yeah.
What type of information it is that shifts your barometer in terms of.
But you can't defend against that. You cannot, because we don't fully understand how each individual is wired.
Yeah.
So they can sit down to me, and I'm speaking from my perspective as a Christian. A Muslim can just do dawah until kingdom come. It's not going to change anything. I don't believe. You cannot argue with me and debate me into. I don't believe. I don't believe Muhammad's the prophet of God. No matter what you say to me, it changes nothing.
Yeah,
Because what you're doing is you're taking historical claims and you're using that as the basis of your argument. So you're moving into the debate and argumentation concept. You cannot shift a person's mind that way. So it's like
maybe not your mind.
Yeah. So, excuse me. That's the way I'm wired.
Yeah.
That's the way I'm wired. It's like, these beliefs are so powerful. Like what you actually genuinely believe is so influential in your perception of reality that only some kind of significant event can shift it. It has to be significant. It's like, for example, there are many people. This is moving into my research area. There are many people who are atheists, who were hit by a car, who had a heart attack, and they clinically dead for like 10, 15, 20 minutes. After coming out of that state of clinical death, being resuscitated, they now believe there's a God. For their entire life, they've denied the existence of God. Now they believe without any doubt God exists because they had an experience. They claim they had a near-death experience. They had a spiritual experience of some kind where they observed themselves outside of their body, and that new information shifted the old belief that had dominance. There is no God. I was hit by a car. My goodness, I saw myself standing outside my body, and now I believe there's a God. You know what I'm trying to say? So I do believe that experience trumps all. And what's fascinating is this. If you don't want to, you can top it off. We in this generation, who have inherited all of these religious traditions, are expected to believe by faith. Okay? Whereas the people, sorry.
It's okay.
Whereas the progenitors, the individuals who actually founded these religions, the entire basis of their belief was direct experiences, is what they claim. Moses claimed to see God on Mount Sinai. Muhammad claimed to encounter an angel. Jesus rose from the dead, and the apostles saw him after and claimed that happened. So it was direct experience which informed their belief. They weren't just expected to believe by faith.
Right.
But it's fascinating that our generation has to believe by faith. I just think that's fascinating as a concept.
I think it was Richard Dawkins in, I think he wrote The God Delusion.
Yep.
Where he tries to lay out an evolutionary explanation for, I think this may even have been in his prologue or introductory chapter, where he tries to lay out an evolutionary function for the state of belief, especially the state of belief in something which cannot be seen. And I think the example he gave was of,
there's like a sound in the woods or something like that.
yeah, I think it was like primitive man pushing through the undergrowth and seeing a movement in the foliage ahead. Now you're faced with a choice. Either you assume there's nothing there and you push on, or you assume, hold on, I haven't seen this thing, but I'm going to assume there's something there that has power, could potentially have power over me, perhaps a threat. Now it's those who assume there's something in the bush despite not having seen it and retreat that are actually more likely to survive and therefore more likely to pass that trait on in their lineage. Whereas those who persist despite the risk of something being ahead of them, that will ultimately face the threat,
of course,
and die.
Because even when on that occasion there's nothing there, on the next occasion there could be a tiger.
Eventually there will be something there.
Exactly. So yeah, I think that's a very eloquent story that kind of.
And what happens is that tendency to believe that there may be something there when in fact there may not be, is something that propagates in the genetic lineage that ultimately, so he speculates, is something that will ultimately become the belief in the occult, the belief in that which cannot be seen, despite the fact we are now taken out of that environment, out of that setting.
But that wiring is still there.
That tendency, perhaps that overactive temporal lobe, is allowed to substantiate in the genetic lineage and eventually become the root of religion.
And even if that everything you've said there isn't objectively true, from like an analogous perspective, it's still an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
It's still valuable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Meaning, even if you got proof that physically, it's still a useful thing to consider.
Even if it were true, that doesn't rule out the possibility of the existence of God.
I mean, that statement, that kind of story you told, is an interesting thing to ponder.
Yeah.
Like, where do these beliefs come from?
Yeah.
Because when you're exposed to something, you don't need to believe it anymore. It's a fact.
Yeah.
I don't need to believe
knowledge replaces belief.
Even when people make the argument sometimes to counter like the theistic position, they say, "Oh, I could be on an alien planet with in a simulation." Well, you still exist on the alien planet. Even when people say simulation thing, I could be connected to a computer. You still exist somewhere. Even if this is a simulation, you are somewhere. You still, if your mind is connected and this is all being realized in your brain, you still exist somewhere. So you do exist. So I always find that's like a strange rebuttal. They say, no, none of this could be real. I could be in the simulation. Yeah, but you still exist somewhere. So the point is, the idea of the origin of where beliefs come from, especially in the unseen, is something that is going to be very difficult to explain, because in every society, in every culture, in every civilization, throughout the entire history, there's been some kind of religion. There's been some people attempt to interpret your reality, or there's been some awareness or a belief, at least, of some sort of higher power that is controlling. There's been a propensity to believe in the unseen, and that cannot be explained. We can try to, but the origin of that is very difficult. The Muslims would say fitra.
The natural inclination.
We would say God has put eternity in their hearts. That's what we say in Christianity. Or we can just say it's a phenomenon. But I do truly believe that you cannot choose what you believe. You can only expose yourself to information that could potentially inform that new belief, or support, or contribute to that new belief. Like Muslims say, Allah guides who He wills. This is what it says in the Quran. So if a person chooses to believe but they're not guided, they won't believe. Christians believe in predestination, some of them. For me, what I just think it's a strange thing that we live in a history where there has been an unbroken chain of people for 2,000 years who have been exposed to the gospel story of Jesus Christ's life, and they've accepted that.
It's remarkable.
We literally live in a generation of people in an unbroken chain back to 2,000 years ago of people who have heard the story and said yes. All the people who said no, their countries ended up not being Christian countries. But those who said yes, it's an unbroken chain to this very day. Because if the chain broke, there would be no more Christians.
But it's interesting what you say about where the chain is now is fully constructed of the links in the chain now are entirely made of those who, based on faith, have accepted a story.
A story.
As opposed to those who initiated the chain, which allegedly are people who witnessed it.
Exactly.
Right.
So, and that's
we're held to a different standard.
Completely standard. Completely. And I find that fascinating because all of these founders, all of them, they all claim direct experience, but they say no, but you won't have that. They're like, they don't all claim that. Christians.
No, they don't all claim
Christians claim miracles still happen and people do, right? But what I'm saying is, the foundation of all of the beliefs of Moses and the ancient Israelites is all direct experience, all of it. It's all personal experience. It's all information entering their world that they cannot explain, which leads them to believe in these things. Whereas we're just believing based off historical narrative. And that's why it's such a phenomenon for me, a person coming to the conclusion that these things are true. Because the amount of things in between a person, for example, becoming a Christian, the amount of logical arguments or reasons. Hey, come on, get too close, bro. The amount of logical and points of argumentation that you can go against Christianity, there are more against a person reaching that point of belief than for it, from my perspective. Because if you really, and this goes for every single religion, if you really analyze the likelihood that the claims that these things happen actually happen, and you go with the most skeptical perspective. Yeah, you're right, yeah?
He's all right.
Cool. Yeah, if you go with the most hyper-skeptical perspectives, there are so many obstacles in between a person coming to believe that a man was risen from the dead.
So it's remarkable that people end up in a state of belief.
And there's been an unbroken chain since 2,000 years ago of people who have said, yes, I believe a man rose from the dead. I believe that he literally ascended into heaven. And that has just passed on from generation. Whereas people who believed in the Greek gods or Thor and all these people, they just stopped believing in things like this. They just said Christianity came in the picture and they accepted that idea instead of their own pre-existing traditional religion. By choice. Yes, maybe some history is there was some force here and there, but for most people, they've had to accept it because a religion only continues if the next generation is there to pass it on. If there was a single generation where the entire community said no, we don't believe this is true.
Well, okay. In the case of Christianity, we look at the last 2,000 years. But what do you, based on how things are going, where do you, in terms of the state of belief? Yeah. So first of all, someone who identifies as a Christian may not necessarily be in a state of belief, right? We kind of covered that.
Of course.
So given where we are now, where I think what has historically been, or what has historically been the Christian world, let's say, I see a landscape of more secular approach to life.
Of course, especially in the Western world, especially.
So being that that's where we are now, where do you see it going, like in the next 2,000 years?